Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome to Stoa, everyone. I am Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And I promise, Jason, I'm not going to get bored of or tired of saying that. And today, we're very lucky because we got the wizard himself at the Stoa, my buddy Jason Fox. For those of you who do not know Jason Fox, he's a Metamodern wizard masquerading as a leadership advisor. He's a speaker, facilitator, and author of the best-selling book, How to Lead a Quest. He writes this amazing newsletter on Substack, which I'll share right here in the chats. And how today's going to go is I'm going to hand it over to Jason in a moment, and he's going to share his thoughts on the theme of today, which is how to be a metamodern thought leader. And if you have any questions, anytime when Jason's talking, just put in the chat. I will call on you to unmute yourself. You can ask your question directly to Jason. If you do not want to be on YouTube, because this will eventually be on YouTube, just indicate that when you write your question in the chat. And there's going to be quite a few people here today. So just put like question or Q before your question so I can kind of filter them out, and feel free to +1 them. Yeah, that being said, I will allow Jason to unmute himself and I will take you in. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, I'm good, mate. How are you? Thank you for the song. It it reminded me of the early pandemic Stoa times when there was this existential dance party going on, and it's like my Achilles heel. Like I get so clammed up, nervous when like dancey things happen. I just end up sitting there super straight. So, but I love the magic themes. It's very good. Yeah, maybe I'll just riff for a little while. I'm hoping that it might evoke some questions amongst those gathered here. At the very least, Pete, you and I can riff for a little bit. I'm hoping that I signaled enough irony with the title of this session, How to Be a Metamodern Thought Leader, what the fuck, you know? There's enough of us, I imagine, that are savvy enough here to see the bullshit that is laced throughout the whole industry, the kind of pomposity and sincerity that's espoused by folks that believe they have the singular, nugget of truth. Before I get into all that, though, I probably should define some terms, as is often the case, as us philosophers want life to do. When I say thought leader, now in the early days, it used to be kind of synonymous with public intellectual, and there was a nobility to the role. And I found myself enamored by the notion of folks out there researching, synthesizing, distilling, packaging, and kind of delivering quality distillations of sense via the different modalities as a speaker, a mentor, an author, a facilitator, a coach. Matt Church, a friend of mine and the founder of Thought Leaders Business School, has been a big mentor for me in this regard. But then, as is the case with a lot of things in this late capitalist society, social media and the spectacle and all the other forces started to warp what was, originally quite a noble thing. And so now thought leadership in and of itself, we see what's happened with TED Talks. When any good thing, once it lasts for some time and garners enough attention, runs the risk of becoming a parody of itself. And that's kind of how I relate to the notion of thought leadership now. Thought leadership, and I say this, most of my revenue comes through making appearances at, I kind of visit enterprise land and show up as a speaker or a facilitator or a coach. And my intent here is I'd love to share what savvy I've accrued so that you guys can get better at showing up in this arena. I believe that this arena, even though it is inundated with pseudoscience and bullshit and this kind of salience for things that don't actually matter, even though that seems to be the norm, there's still a role that we can play. And there's a thing going on here, kind of like Yancey Strickler's dark forest theory of the internet, where I feel as though if we were to take, I'm presuming here that there's a baseline familiarity with metamodernism, but I'll just do a quick run through. Hansi Freinach's book, The Listening Society, hit me at a time that my dad was passing away with cancer and I was going through my own existential crisis, and this kind of alchemy of things just change my, kind of like what David Chapman might call an ontological remodeling. Wasn't fun, but it changed the way I see things. If we think about modernity as a set of values, there's a lot of sincerity. There's a belief in rationality and science and meritocracy and in the individual. And this seems to be the dominant modus for the thought leadership industry. And this is where we get the motivational speakers, the leadership speakers, the consultants, the hero consultants that appear as though they have the single point of truth. And, here's the neat linear 5-step plan on how you need to do things. And then sometimes the postmodern thought leader, public intellectual, comes in and points out accurately with apt critique the flaws in that kind of thinking and brings a lot of skepticism to the grand narratives that we espouse. The trouble is, though, whilst this critique is apt and needed and necessary, it often doesn't lead to anything constructive. It's just ever more deconstruction. And then the metamodern thought leader potentially appears to do some sort of synthesis and reconstruction. I say that, but I don't necessarily believe it. This is also nascent and emergent. And for me, my own path through this, I did a PhD in motivation science. I then became a motivational speaker. Very all sincere, and then I started to become very jaded and very pomo, and then throughout all this I realized, actually, if we become deft in the ability to cultivate a mythos, and a mythos is like a set of stories that are told about ourselves that then allow us to cloak ourselves, Trojan horse style, to smuggle in good philosophical sensibilities into the heart of enterprise land, there's some good change that we can make. And so that's kind of how I've learned to play things now, is this thought leader thing. And I think that there's potential for a lot of folks here too. Rather than simply, and I come back to Yancey Strickler's dark forest theory of the internet, rather than simply abandon all the mainstream open web sources, which then leaves a whole heap of people still subject to the predatory mechanisms of late capitalism, we deny that arena our influence. And as much as it fills me with a kind of mild loathing, I do like to think that we can kind of, here we are in the cozy webs, and we're in the Stoa, and we're able to cultivate philosophical sensibilities, druidic sensibilities, a kind of savviness, a deftness, stoic principles. And then yet still we need to be able to navigate our way back into the heart of enterprise land so that we might be able to plant some seeds and cause some mischief there. And I guess I've kind of wrapped myself around in circles here in my own definition around all of this. And I'm hoping that I'm causing enough provocations here to get folks, oh shit, my light has just fallen down, hang on. Hopefully I'm causing enough provocations here for some questions to emerge. The risks in this industry are that we can fall in love with our own myth, and we can lose the ironic detachment, the kind of the ironic sincerity that allows this stuff to work. And if we cling too tightly to a single point of truth, and then we start to espouse that, and we start to gain followers and all those things, then a lot of the themes that Peter has written about in his letters, that just comes to life. There's this kind of both and juxtaposition, a dance that we must do if we want to be effective in this arena. And sometimes this translates to intentionally sabotaging our efforts. Sometimes it translates to resisting the call to optimization. There are plenty of folks, I know that I can imagine it's happening with Peter, happens in my world, but there's plenty of folks that earnestly suggest that there's ways that we can do things to optimize, with your newsletter lists. You can create all sorts of fancy schemes and campaigns to kind of drive more revenue. But if we kind of come back to, okay, what is the role of a metamodern thought leader? And I'm hesitant to label it as such because it's all quite emergent and nebulous and stuff. I would suggest that one of the roles that we can do is to bring complexity thinking into the mix, to act as complexity practitioners and philosopher poets, to awaken people to the notion that there are multiple ways of seeing, and potentially the result of our role is that we can arrive at a richer synthesis together, or at least a proto-synthesis that is continually updated and renewed. This is one of the things, before we got into this, Peter, I was like, oh, cool, I'm just going to riff and talk and stuff. And then I have this classic Zoom thing that unless I'm kind of sharing content, I kind of yearn for this agent arena kind of dance. And so in a moment, I'm going to be asking you to consider some questions and starting to get them in the Q&A thread. I'll give you some priming for the questions. My intent, this is an industry and a modus that is fraught with peril, psychological, existential peril, and yet there is the potential for us to have some good effect. For example, one of the, I did some work for the CEO of a financial advisory group and accounting firm. Wonderful, wonderful person. I did that there. It seemed like just a typical job, but then that led to deeper conversations. That led to him reading the Listening Society and Sand Talk, and he's now my accountant and financial advisor, and heavily interested in metamodernism and exploring what role accountants and financial advisors can play in helping people transition from game A to game B. There's ripples that we can create by introducing people to new ideas. But I guess sometimes the risk is that we get so caught up in our complexity and our philosophy that we're not approachable or as accessible as we can be. And part of the challenge of being a metamodern thought leader is this weird hybridization of signaling. You've got to kind of appear on the radar in the modernist landscape in enterprise land. And you've got to have the language that allows you to sneak past the cognitive gatekeepers in an enterprise. And yet also at the same time, you need to be subtly signaling the irony that says, hey, I know that you know that this is kind of bullshit, but at the same time, maybe we can smuggle in some good sensibilities at the same time. And this is a funny dance that I haphazardly seem to have done okay with over time. And maybe there's some sensibilities to share there. And so in your questions, I'm open to any questions, but I'm hopeful for the 45 minutes that we'll have remaining here, that there may be some of you thinking, maybe I can, with this rich synthesis, this proto-synthesis through the various readings and experience and expertise that you've accrued, maybe there's a way that you can channel and show up in enterprise land or play the role as a thought leader with irony and sincerity in a way that is efficacious so as to cultivate more of the sensibilities that will bring us closer to a world more curious and kind. I'm hoping that maybe there's some folks there that could do with some insight there. I just certainly don't have the answers. I don't know how to be a metamodern thought leader. I'm making it up as I go. Half the time I disagree with myself, but maybe in amongst the mess, some insight can emerge. So with that super haphazard, scattergun approach, Pete, how did I go? Was that okay? I think I was all over the place there. I had this big imposter syndrome thing going on because of all those superstars you have in the Stoa, right? That appear and they like these galaxy minds, as you call them, that just espouse these beautiful constellations of wisdom and stuff. And, I've mostly been impostering through my whole life. So here I am yet again. I've gotten away with it so far. Let's see how the next 45 minutes goes.
Well, you're in good company, my friend, because I feel that every time I invite a speaker in as well. So I have a few threads I want to take you down, but again, if you have any questions, I see some already in the chat, just throw them in the chat and then I'll call you to unmute yourself. So I think I told you that I have one foot in the kind of the thought leader, corporate land with being a Dale Carnegie trainer. I'm not active in it. But when I was doing it and I was kind of in this sandbox, it's like I had to code switch, and so I guess just a general question. How do you not lose yourself in the code switching? And how do you maintain authenticity? Do you have any heuristics to know when to signal the irony, when to kind of just speak like normie language?
It's beautiful. It's exactly the question. This is the tension. And one of the notions I got quite clear, this is like the most dangerous thing I'm about to say here, so take it with a massive pinch of salt. When I first read this, despite all the warnings, it was like crack for me for about a month. We need to be mindful of developmental blindness. And so what that means is whenever we show up and work in an audience or work with a particular culture or group of people, there's going to be a mix of folks at different developmental stages. Now, I don't actually adhere to any particular model. I think that every individual model is kind of, it's fraught to anchor to any of that. But just generally speaking, we're at patchy levels of development, ourselves included, and we all have much more to learn. So often it's a kind of a calibration, like a situational orientation towards relevance realization, as John Vervaeke might say. There's this kind of fluid depth probes, signals that you kind of respond to get a read of where folks are. Generally speaking, though, my approach is kind of fox-like in the sense that I don't actually have strong opinions. I have weak opinions that are strongly held, as Venkatesh Rao of Ribbon Farm might describe it. A hedgehog kind of goes in, and there are a lot of hedgehoggy thought leaders out there that have a strong opinion, and they have products that are built around that, and they have things off the shelf, and they have a lot of stuff kind of anchored to a particular program, and then they kind of come in, and that's the lens in which they see things. And I think that blinds them to potentially what could emerge. So coming in with weak opinions, being able to shift dispositionally, but the things in terms of a heuristic, I'd be looking for the kind of the fractal truths, the kind of things that make sense at different levels of complexity. And that often translates to simple heuristics, like at the heart of it, if we can get people to think and relate with each other a little bit more complexly, if we can encourage folks to be a little bit more curious and kind, and if we can soften the metric obsession and the linear rigidity that seems to be so prevalent in most modern institutions, and open people up to new ways of thinking, considering and seeing, then we're probably doing some good work. So at the heart of it, that's the sensibility that I keep returning to. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but it's something.
And then one thing I noticed too, doing to piggyback off that, when I was doing kind of the training and kind of like the kind of the speaking stuff, I noticed I didn't have to do much. You know, I had relied on sort of my talent stack of being a good public speaker, my acting background, and I was saying like kind of like cliche stuff, stuff that, you know, I could stand behind, you know, argue that I believe in, but they were cliche. And then everyone was like, oh, wow, oh my God, this is amazing stuff. And,
yeah.
And, you know, I didn't have, so there's a point of like disappointment, maybe even boredom that I was experiencing in that. And I didn't have the opportunity to do the Trojan horse strategy.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you wrestle with that.
Yeah. So there's this thing sometimes where your meta narrator is just sitting there watching yourself thinking, oh, there you go, you silly monkey, going through that pantomime performance again. And I mean, there's like what I've learned as a writer from a metamodern lens, because we're kind of bringing multiple selves to this. We could this kind of nebulous cluster of different aspects of selfness. And so when I'm writing, I enjoy marginalia. So I can have like a mainstream thread, and then the marginalia is where I can kind of bring in the yes ands or yeah buts or the both ands, and just kind of enrich and flourish it. And I guess from a speaking modus, which is a lot, you know, we don't really quite have in Zoom, there's different parts on the stage. There's all the gesticulation. There's extreme ways to communicate irony, even though you're saying something quite cliche and sincere. And these little hat tips, most of them will wash over the audience, and the dry humor doesn't really land. But sometimes it pings that little cluster of folks that stay around at the end, and then there's this kind of exchange of ideas and senses and stuff, and somehow there's been this like little extra blossoming of awakening, and that's kind of the things that you look for. But yeah, it comes back to this. I mean, my frequent thing is that I'll rock up and I'll share things, and it's gone over the head of too many people. So yeah, that's a tricky thing. I don't really quite know, and I never want to dumb things down, but sometimes you need to kind of find the more common fractal that people can resonate and relate to.
And any themes in the corporate world that is alive right now, like, you know, you name a thought leader or like just leadership, like any ones that maybe have that existential opening, to use Andrew Tagar's word, that you can kind of like double click on, and then
that's nice. Okay, so yeah, there's always fads and themes going through. I mean, you know, it was disruption, agile, transformation, all the common things. Now, there's a book that really changed it accelerated my loathing for the industry. It's called a book called Winners Take All. I can't remember who wrote it. It's the partner of the author of the Art of Gathering, which is also a very beautiful book. But this notion of winners take all, you've probably mentioned it, Peter. It's this kind of like, there is a theater of innovation that so often happens in enterprise land. This kind of pantomime where, you know, we say all the right things, and there's little hackathons and experiments and stuff like that, and nothing actually changes. And that's something I'm kind of very hesitant to get swept up in. Otherwise, I just feel like some propaganda puppet that's just dancing to the tune. It's harder to smuggle in the sensibilities that way. I've been lucky enough to, there's something unfair in terms of what, and people have an experience of you. I think you're doing this, by the way, Pete. Sorry, I'm shortening you to Pete. You're okay with Pete, or would you prefer Peter?
Only you can call me Pete. That's the
Okay,
store rule.
Okay. It's better than Stoic Daddy. I'm not ready for that yet.
Not yet.
There's something. There's something like it's. I can't even remember what I was saying. Anyway, there's. I literally can't remember what I'm saying. So on that note, yes.
You're talking about the book Winner Takes All. That was.
Oh yeah. So that the realization that. So when it comes to the themes, it's like every year there's a new spin on the same old shit that's not actually going to change anything. And as we all know, we're in the midst of a meta crisis. Things are getting increasingly dire. And one of the most challenging things is like if we dial up our furor at this, we all have different roles to play. Sometimes I like people thinking about what mythic role we're playing in this current chapter of our lives in society. And, for example, Peter, you're doing this beautiful role of this gathering people in this like meaning crisis as we cohere and make sense together. It's beautiful, and it's answering a very, very real felt need that has been missing for some time. And if we think about it, some folks are actually, maybe their role is to draw some attention to some things. But as you know, with the mimetic tribal wars and the paper you've pioneered and all of that, sometimes an excess of furor and outrage doesn't actually help things. And sometimes, I was writing down in your latest post, you said, it's wise to be sneaky here. So let's sneak our way to communitas. And I really like the role of sneakiness, of the surreptitious, of the kind of, I feel like there's a congruency to complexity practitioner here, where instead of like coming up with a grand plan and saying, this is the way, we instead, we do the tweaking, we sense, we pull the levers. Sometimes this means we smuggle our way in and we use some of the language and the code that's happening in enterprise land so that we can start to subvert it. And the beautiful thing about most complexity thinking, when people really start to contemplate that, is that, well, there's a dangerous thing in that your mind can literally implode, and you can venture to the abyss and, have to cross the chasm of nihilism and all of that. But this complexity thing, you just start, well, I wrote a book called How to Lead a Quest, which the thesis was that we need to make distinctions between meaningful progress and the delusion of progress. The delusion of progress is where default thinking gets in the way of meaningful progress. And this is where in many organizations, it's much more of a career advancement strategy to broadcast that you're doing the work than it is to actually do the work itself. And this creates a rich pantomime of busyness where everyone's busy, but we're not actually doing anything. And meaningful progress is that which brings us closer to future relevance. And that as a thought bubble, just as the seed to plant in there, is really, it's pernicious, because what is meaningful progress, really? What is progress? What is meaningful? What do we mean by this? In what context? From whose perspective? And that question for me, I mean, it's plagued me. It certainly hasn't made me more profitable at all. And none of this, by the way, is a pathway to great profits. This is more about high-level fulfillment in this role at modest business success. This question of meaningful progress, I mean, progress is kind of sneered at from postmodernists, from the modernist sense of progress. From a metamodern sense, it's maybe it's something we can move towards. But then again, after seeing Tyson Yunkaporter and reading his book, Sand Talk, I'm a little bit more skeptical about civilization nowadays. And so as we dance in this transitionary phase to the, inevitable collapse of modern society, it's tricky to figure out our role. But the more that we can smuggle in philosophical sensibilities and cultivate, savvy for complexity, and the more we can gather and cultivate communitas, across different mimetic tribes, that seems to be a good path for us. Sorry, I'm doing this thing where you give me a question, I just kind of take it on this like lovely walk through the park, and don't know if I answer it, but I create enough distractions so no one notices.
I'm following you on the walk, so I'm loving it. It reminds me of Steal the Culture. John Rivera.
Yeah.
You
Totally.
got to be a trickster, right?
Trickster makes this world. Yeah.
Right. So before I turn to the questions in the chat, I wanted to ask you about kind of psychotechnologies that inspired you and that maybe you use. Because you're the one person that, like, I've been admiring you from afar for a while. Just how you kind of pulled off the two worlds. You know, that kind of the trainer, kind of like the motivational speaker type role, a thought leader role, and then the kind of this metamodern weirdo game be sense making web type person. And then it seems like you had maintained that integrity, and I'm like, oh, I admire that. And I'm curious if, for those of you who don't know, there's a lot of these kind of like authentic relating practice, we-space practice, like circling, empathy dialogue, empathy circles, restorative dialogues, all that type of stuff. That kind of give you that glimpse of communitas, as I put in the previous journal. Do you use any of the practices yourself, and do you apply them to what you do?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And the admiration is mutual, by the way. Even like back in the intellectual explorer times, I was saying to my friend, Michael Bangestenio, who's on this call here, who's based in Toronto, it's like, oh, you guys have got to catch up. And it's cool to see the worlds kind of like merging. Yeah, it's fucking hard. It's really hard because, you know, on the one side, you're surrounded by earnest friends who just want you to optimize what you do and just settle and productize and just, you know, accept that there are easier ways to make money and that you can just scale this and do that and so on. And then on the other side, you've got friends that, you know, are snorting at the whole complex, you know, the thought leadership complex and the enterprise land and stuff like that, and looking at, you know, the stuff that you do with a bit of a lofty sneer. And then in amongst it, you've got the different arenas in which there was one time, it seems so ridiculous now, but I got flown business class to Bangkok to speak at a conference for a region where they had all the region's leaders there, and the CEO ended up speaking 40 minutes overtime. So I spoke for 10 minutes and then I caught my plane back. And this is all within the space of 24 hours. Big waste of money, big waste of carbon emissions for the planet. It's not something I would do nowadays. And then as soon as I got back, like the first thing I remember doing is that, you know, I had to clean the poos from our cat in the cat litter. And there's this kind of, you know, big transition between on stage and then, the thing is, you just got to not fall prey to narcissism, not kind of like, the more I kind of relate to myself as kind of this nebulous cluster of multiple selves, the better I seem to thrive and flourish. And one of the things that's worked for me in recent times, although I kind of screwed it up a little bit, is retreating to the cozy web in some way and just cultivating a group of like-minded folks. But I did it in a way that ended up opening it up to everyone, and then it became like quite a large number. And so I've just recently kind of canned that, but there's finding an affinity of a few folks that you can trust and rely on. I'm very lucky that I've got a few of those folks in my life, and a few of them are here that will catch, you know, folks that you can have each other's backs and can catch you when you're down. And I think that I remember Jim Rupp was saying something in another one of his Game B rants about how it's just bizarre that we can get to adulthood and many folks actually don't have many close friends. And the thing, you know, talk about communitas, and I think that, you know, the cultivation of friendships of what was it? Who was that? Epictetus? No. Who was the philosopher? It's all about
Aristotle?
No, the good things in life. Kind of what was it? Anyway, we know what we mean. There's finding good friendships, cultivating like a sense of like, these are the things that I kind of rally to. So I have my ups and downs quite a bit, but that seems to be the safety net that works for me.
All right. So let's pivot to
Thanks for the questions, by the way. I really, sorry, Peter, there's a quality to those types of questions. Like, I've been yearning to talk about that, the kind of the existential challenges, the psychological things of how do you manage the cells in the different arenas that I really appreciate those questions, and I find it really special. So thank you.
My pleasure. And it's something that's always on my mind, given the kind of like the code switching, speaking to all the mimetic tribes, and, you know, trying to relate to as much different reality towns as possible.
Yeah, and not getting so. I mean, there's a risk here that we can end up reading and being exposed to such brilliant ideas that we become like harder to relate at the barbecue, you know, the family barbecue that's going on there. So there's this is where I do think that the trickster is a very good archetype for us to keep in mind, because the trickster is a shapeshifter in most mythologies, and they're able to kind of adapt to each different context and I guess embrace a multitude of mythic roles. So sorry. Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the chats. We got Tim. You got a lot of +1s, Tim. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Jason. Long time no see.
Hey.
Look, I mean, so there's a couple of things that hit for me, and I'll be fairly brief. One is that idea of sneakiness and the whole Trojan horse thing with big corporates, I think, is a really interesting theme to explore. But the other thing that's really coming to the front for me today, listening to this, is, I mean, and it's implied in the topic, but I think thought leader is completely obsolete. And,
yes.
and you know, I think, you know, if we're operating in complex systems, we should be striving to be experiment leaders. And so, you know, given, you know, I don't know if we have a lot of CEOs here today, but we, you know, we may or may not. But what do you think about as actions that we can be taking right now today that might help us move things forward?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I love the question. And yeah, you're right. The notion of thought leadership, and I would even say unless we're talking about complicated systems, the notion of expertise is a little bit suspect as well. The thing that I look to, it's a good question. I mean, there's the distinction between a complicated system has experts and authorities and a single point and whereas in these rich, complex adaptive systems that we find ourselves in, it's much more about being explorers and experimenters and tweakers and synthesizers. I find that there's a complexity practitioner by the name of Sonia Blignort who does work with Dave Snowden in the Cynefin thing, and she has this beautiful article on Medium, what I've learned as a complexity practitioner. And I personally, I really like the term complexity practitioner. I don't think it's promulgated in the market that well, and I don't think folks recognize it, but that's something that I often hold to as a point of differentiation, as opposed to someone who's coming in supposedly with all the answers. A complexity practitioner doesn't have all the answers, is aware that it's a kind of a partnership process. It's something that requires some sensing first. It's a practitioner too, though, because there's one of the traps that all of us can get lost in is the temptation to marvel at complexity. And I can find myself there. Whereas in an arena, we actually need to, choosing to not choose is still a choice that has implications in a complex system. And so because we are part of it and it's shaping us as we are shaping it, there's all sorts of paradoxes and tensions we need to be mindful of. And thus, the complexity practitioner thing, and if anyone finds the article, Sonia Blignort, complexity practitioner, you can Google that and put it in the chat thread. The sensibility around that means that we're not promising outcomes. We're not coming in with linear plans or predetermined processes. We're coming in, we're sensing, and we're trying to take notice of the patterns that are emerging there. And then we are conducting those experiments, those weak probes, and we are trying to sense and assimilate some sort of sense from it all. And this is interesting because it doesn't really play to the cards of the thought leadership game of the expert, the charismatic hero that come in and save the day. But I think that we're seeing a shift in the code of what people look for. And one of my own sales strategies, when I'm in conversation with folks that are considering what may be a high value engagement, I'll often do some sort of cheeky downward comparison, which will usually be some sort of downward comparison where I'll point to a large firm and say, look, I'm sure you're considering different options. And there are folks out there that have well-established programs with a lot of gravitas around them. They can come in and they're very safe options because they can steamroll through anything there, but you're probably going to get a generic thing that's going to cost you a lot of money. And there are folks out there that have their own pet theories that think they've got all the answers and can come in there. And that may be fun for a little while, but I sense that that in 6 months' time, we're probably going to be back in the same situation. And besides cultures or whatever thing, but it's complex. We actually need to be a much more sensitive approach. So there's things there. And I think that if we collectively start to, terms are a tricky one, because if we adhere to them too tightly, they become corrupted, and then you get the game A motherfuckers come in and scale it, and then turn, you know, and then we have to move to another term, which is why I call myself a wizard rather than a thought leader. You know, when really, like, there's enough of a sense of the archetype that people understand. Oh, wizard, okay, person who thinks a lot and maybe, you know, plays with magic. And for me, emergence is a kind of magic, so it works in my remit. But I don't know. I hope that merry-go-round has given some insights. Thank you for the question. I know that you are of like mind, and one of the great things that the Stoa is doing is actually bringing a lot of more of this stuff to the surface, like the work of Nora Bateson, the Tyson Younger Porter. Like there's so much of this savviness that like this is the angle, the complexity angle is where we need to tap into. But I will say there's part of me that kind of wants a lot of the modern institutions to die. Like there's some folks that say, oh, you know, we need to fix our culture here. What will happen, you know? And then they're like, we can't afford to do this. And it's like, well, if you can't afford to, then good people ought to leave, or, you know, reconsider their options. And then before, but I guess you're going to have these lifeless husks that keep on coasting by unless some dramatic change happens. So I don't know. I'm going way off track here. Thanks for the question, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Let's go with Ben. You just had a question.
Jason, thanks
Hey, Ben.
for the talk. Really resonates, actually. It's even on a personal level, sort of the I have a game A life that obviously running marketing for large tech companies, basically selling enterprise solutions. So it's steeped in that. And so all of this, the trickster and the multitudes and sort of the perspective, it definitely resonates. I had a question about your accountant scenario. And I think that this actually bears some interest. Is there any deeper insight into that sort of the accountant scenario? And I'll read out my question. It was, can you speak more to the accountant scenario as a model of bootstrapping into the enterprise? Obviously, just as just other words for Trojan horsing into the enterprise. Is there a there for that model? Because I'm assuming this was passed on, this was diffused, and this was kind of scaled deeper through that medium.
I would say it was less, I love your question. And by the way, and I think the tension of game A, game B is something that we're all grappling with. It's just one of the extra anxieties that we have in this wonderful age that we live in. I would say it's less that it was passed through and diffused, and more that I arrived and created the conditions for such thoughts to be evoked. And so part of what a lot of the thought leader role, I'll go back to my inverted commas since Tim's wonderful question, because when I say thought leader, I don't actually mean thought leader. It's just the moniker that we can, you know, sneak our way into enterprise land. But the role of the complexity practitioner might be in bringing the provocations, and that for you, like, it might be exposing people to ways of seeing and thinking that they weren't aware of before. So in my accountant thing, I did something for the whole association within Australia of accountants, and it was this terrible thing that I was supposed to speak before dinner, but they ended up serving dinner first. And so I was in this room full of drunk people. Not all were drunk, and I was sharing my stuff, and it just resonated with that 2 or 3% in the room, like deeply resonated. So I got talking, and then from there, book exchanges, you keep in touch. I came in and did an internal workshop, and then turned into a wonderful friendship. And this is the person that actually introduced me to Sandtalk way back before Tyson, you know, has gotten as popular as he is now. And the types of experiments that are happening internally within his business are experimenting with hierarchical setups of beginning to position to clients not just a, you know, game A plan, but maybe some game A B things. And all this stuff it's a gentle, I can't point to any particular case study, but you can kind of sense some of the ripples that we can play into, which then comes back into your role. And I'd sometimes like to think that when I'm speaking to an audience in enterprise land, that there are sleeper agents in the room. And these are folks that have quietly worked their way into positions of influence so they can affect some really great change. But the trouble is, and to quote Patrick Rothfuss, the author of The Name of the Wind, Barster, one of the Fae characters in there, says, we understand how dangerous a mask can be. We all become what we pretend to be. And one of the risks I see for us playing this game, which comes back to Peter's thing, is that if you wear the mask for too long, you can start to actually think and be and act and essentially become that which you seek to not become. So like this tension of managing it all, this means that sometimes it pays to, well, in my instance, it pays to deliberately self-sabotage me, my efforts sometimes, so as to keep things real and not get carried away. And I don't know what it might translate to you, but you're in a good position to be able to influence things. And this is where I see all the work that we can do, cultivating these sensibilities. We can, maybe diffuse is a nice thing, or kind of spread, or like evoke, or, help shape other worlds. Thanks for the question.
No, great.
Cool, thank you. Tim Stewart, you had a question. You're still here. You can unmute yourself.
I was literally reposting someone else. So let me find out who that was. Or let me just read it. You, Jason, referred to getting past the gatekeepers in Enterprise Land, but I hazard to guess that your vantage is one in which the individuals looking for your services are relatively open to change and enlightened perspectives. Or else, why would they hire a coach? Could you speak to specific experiences where you had to try and crack a relatively resistant crowd that already knows best, or perhaps a crowd that believes open to suggestions, but really don't have the commitment to follow through? Sorry, whoever asked that, and I stole.
Yeah, it was John. John, would you like to just add anything to that? You're on mute.
Yeah, look, no worries, Tim. You've read the question, but I guess, the conversations that's happened in the meantime, when we are on the inside, and I have been on the outside working, not as a coach, but, external consultants, and now on the inside. And when you are perhaps one of those 2 or 3% that desperately wish for change, but you're surrounded by people who already know best, they've adopted the language of agile, and so they think they're already operating.
Yeah, we're pivoting. Yeah.
And so therefore, it's just there's really no sense that they need to change, or if they do need to change, they already know how best to change. And so, in some sense, we kind of, I guess, have to resign ourselves to just playing the position. But then, on the other hand, desperately want to be the agent of that change as well. And so I guess I was asking whether you could perhaps access some of to the extent that you've been in situations perhaps where the crowd is particularly reticent, or barely get invited in, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. A good question. And I do tend to work well with smart and skeptical audiences that have seen it all before. But if you put me into a room of salespeople with alpha male, sales folks that are looking for their solution to close things and get shit done and get their results in, it's a lot harder. My strategy is, like, there's always calibration. Like, you've always got to, like, there's the agent arena, being fit, being able to orientate yourself to, or work with the reality that manifests. If we were to quote improv and Keith Abrahamson's work, it's like, you got to work with what's in front of you. And so a strategy is often, for me, if I come back to this distinction between the delusion of progress and that which could be considered meaningful progress, that in the context of constructive discontent, where you recognize the discrepancy between where you currently are and where you want to be, that there's this weird kind of catalyzing that can happen when you put certain things to language. It's hard to unsee. This kind of translates to a burning platform or a burning aspiration. And I mean, you go, it's the same effect with all these things. Like David Schmachtenberger, being more aware of the exponential tech threat, like the existential threat of exponential technology. I can't unknow that now. And there are certain things that just shape the way they do. And I just feel like, when you say that you want to be the agent, I know you don't mean specifically, but there is a kind of a humility to this, or even a metamodern juxtaposition of like a inflated sense of self-importance with a bit of a glint at your own, ironic self-importance. There is that we actually got to be quite humble. Sometimes it's actually, you know, we come in and we create some conditions and we evoke some things and we make some tweaks, but people don't actually associate it with us. And that's fine. You know, it's like there are different areas that we can come to. And if we think about like a particularly reticent audience, and I'm going to come back to Hansi Freinach's work here, even though I've like since come to see some gaps in the otherwise brilliant book, which I absolutely love and highly recommend to everyone. One of the things he talks about is state. What is the psychological state of folks? And if people are reticent, and you know, the chances are that maybe like, what can we do to enhance psychological well-being? What can we do to enhance a sense of belongingness? Because the more that people actually feel well rested and, you know, well nourished and in, you know, in a good state, the more likely they are to be trusting and collaborative and creative and so on. And so there's almost always something that can be done. It's just a calibration of, you know, if I'm having a bunch of, you know, pissed off, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some sort of funny industry, cotton farmers that you know, blah, and I'm not going to come in with highfalutin complexity theory. I'll probably like meet folks where they're at dance and just try to like subtly sneak things in. I love the question. Yeah, there's reticent audiences, but yeah, it's just a question of adapting your modus so that you can bring about some sort of shift. I hope that helps. I mean, that's also like the trouble is, you know, you've got your client, you've got the person who books you, you've got the audience itself, then you've got yourself as your own audience as well. And navigating that, sometimes it's like ticking enough of the client boxes, giving what giving what the audience think they want to feel good in the moment, but also kind of fulfilling your own needs. And that's one of the tensions to juggle here. But it's something that I think we can all, you know, all of us here can do.
All right, Rain, you had a question.
Hey, Jason, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Maybe you can help me understand within myself, why is it that I'm so much less resistant to this idea of sneakiness than I am to other forms of strategy or manipulation? And the way I think is like, there's a lot of modernists that are, you know, explicitly talking about effectiveness and implicitly are manipulating. And sneakiness seems to be explicit manipulation, but implicit effectiveness and goodwill. So
Totally.
The question sort of comes down to, what is the difference between sneakiness and instrumentalism in your view?
Oh, I love it. I love it. This is a great question. I shall ponder this further after this and try to write about this, because gosh, it irks me when I catch people that that are sincerely using kind of manipulative or hypnotherapy or kind of like psychotechnology tools. That's like they're sincerely using it as though they don't know that the other parties are doing it, and that's it just irks me. If I was ever to deploy certain techniques and methods, I would probably draw attention to what I'm doing, like transparency, like say, for example, that downward comparison example that I gave before, where I'd kind of list two of the other options and in a kind of a downward comparison way. I would often just point out to the client, of course, I'm saying this because I want you to work with me and I think we can do great things together. There's a way of, it's kind of like, it's a way of exercising the demons quickly and swiftly as they occur. So the irony of sneakiness is, if you're being overt about your sneakiness, you get to be much more effective and you get to kind of expunge yourself of any of the ickiness of the process at the same time. So I generally try to avoid anything that makes me feel icky, but as soon as I find myself feeling icky, I'll draw attention to it. And if this was a physical stage, you can literally step to the side and like look to where you were and what you were doing. There's like anyone who's seen me on stage, I'm quite fluid in gesticular form. I love this kind of like overtly pointing out like the sneakiness. I think the sneakiness is also open, like the implicit, the implications of sneakiness is, if one is sneaking, they're going gently. They're being hyper aware of the environment around them. They're not looking to draw attention to themselves. They're not looking to create a ruckus and be loud and, you know, move fast and break things. It's a different dispositional approach to affecting change that is in many ways it's decentering yourself, which means you're not, it's and that stuff, that's probably why it appeals to you and I imagine many folks here, as opposed to the look at me. And you can see a modernist thought leader just subscribe to their newsletters. They'll probably have about a dozen photos of themselves in their own newsletter. They'll have quotes of themselves saying their own quote to a background photo of themselves making the quote. They'll talk about, they'll probably have an acronym built around their name to talk about their formula for success or whatever it is. And that stuff is like, it's hard to adhere to. Mind you though, there's a trap with the postmodern mode, which could get so sneaky that you're actually ineffective altogether. You're just scoffing, and there you are sitting in your corner with your cigarette and, sneering at the world, but not actually necessarily showing up in the places where you could be affecting change. So there is a synthesis between the two roles, but the disposition of sneakiness, I don't know. I think it works well for us complexity practitioners. Thanks for the question. I love it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Christian, you had a question about complexity practitioners. You can unmute yourself.
Hey, yeah. I had a question and someone added to it, so I'll read her addition as well. Where's my question? Okay. Is it possible to truly be a complexity practitioner without the presence of other complexity practitioners? I say I'm trying to point at the limitations of becoming in isolation. The underlying idea here being that how can you truly approach complexity from a singular place without, feedback and all those kinds of things? Is there a trap in wanting to put on the costume of being a complexity practitioner? And then Stephanie adds to the question by asking, if this is true, how can complexity practitioners best support, co-coach one another in this work? How can this interdependence be accounted for in regards to our livelihood? Thanks for the opportunity
Beautiful questions.
to ask the question.
Lovely, I love it, and I'm glad for this clarification because this whole thing that we've been talking about has been very almost individual. There's a risk here that we can fall into the trap thinking that, oh, look, cast yourself like this, and then you too can be, the call will go out and then you'll parachute in and work your magic and then jetpack off into the sunset and everyone's happier. It's not like that. And I'm hesitant with, as again, like a complexity practitioner, it's not necessarily something that clicks. It's an affinity, a disposition. We only exist in relation to each other, to quote James Cass, one cannot be human by oneself. Our character has an inescapably fluid thing. We co-create each other here. And so, think about this complexity practitioner thing. I wouldn't be talking about it if I hadn't read the post from Sonia Blignor, and I wouldn't have come across her post if I hadn't have listened to Dave Snowden in a conversation with Jim Wright. And there's this cascade of things, and we wouldn't be here because, if not for the work of Peter and the Stoa, like all of this stuff, right? We're co-creating each other. So that's inescapable. Like, it's to quote David Chapman, if we think of ourselves, it's the nebulous but patent. So the boundaries to self, like there's an inherent interconnectedness, and yet there's also pattern and distinction too. And so being aware that, cool, that's the organic realism kind of, we're all in this together. And then it's about how can we be a little bit more intentional around this? And so I think one of the things that resonates for many folks with the Stoa, and this is something that I'm stumbling and trying to put my own clarion calls out for too, is that complexity practitioners, or at least those who have an affinity for that disposition, can kind of recognize each other. And there's a lot of things like I would look for subtly, and when I find these folks, it's wonderful and we keep in touch. But if I find like a belligerent, opinionated hedgehog, then unlikely to get, I'm not likely to give them a call on the weekend and see how they're going. The complexity practitioners generally have there's a softness or a gentleness in how we inquire things, or if we're being a bit more spirited, it's done in an obviously like in a performative manner that's transparent. Anyone who reads the start of Hansi Freinach's Listening Society will see that the character of Hansi Freinach starts with this kind of this extreme bombacity, which is this way of smuggling in beautiful sincerity. I'm getting off track here. The complexity things, yeah, I think we need to find each other, because it's freaking hard work. Like, all the forces are geared towards still this life is complicated. Let's find the absolute truth. Let's find the fix, you know, let's proceed with linear thinking. And the ones of us that have a little bit more savvy in this regard are a lot rarer, it seems, and we could do more to find each other. And I'd also add that a lot of the indigenous knowledges have been practicing this stuff for many tens of thousands of years. So there's a lot of savviness there that we could actually learn from too. And I'm actually remiss in acknowledging, and I just take this moment to pay my respect to the custodians upon the land of which we meet, and extend this solidarity to any First Nations folks gathered here today, any elders present, past and emerging, and just acknowledge that, yeah, we're fumbling around here and there's still so much to learn. Thank you very much for the question.
Awesome. So we are approaching the hour. We have about 2 minutes left. Is there any kind of closing thoughts, anything you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, thank you. I think I started, I'm really heartened by the kind of questions here, and the sense, this kind of nameless quality of communitas that is being cultivated here. I think I approach this in hindsight with a little bit of, I don't know, in my own world, it's very easy to be the kind of this is my smug, you know, take this with a pinch of salt. It's very easy to kind of show up and be like kind of clever and you know, charismatic and smart and so on in enterprise land. But amongst you guys, I feel like the imposter syndrome, and I started this like with extreme intimidation. I know you had Bayo on earlier today, whom I look up to, and you have so many galaxy minds here. But then swiftly, it felt as though, I personally felt a deep affinity for all of you here, and I'd just like to say thank you for gathering and for, you know, co-participating in this, and thank you, Peter, for the wonderful work that you're doing.
I'll make some closing announcement in a moment, but yeah, just to comment on that, like I kind of view these sort of sessions eventually going to be like reverse sermons. You know, someone comes in, the Galaxy Mind, they share their thoughts, but the quality of questions, the quality of minds that are congregating here is awesome. And so it becomes this sort of like dialogue, and you're just a vessel to receive kind of like these questions. So yeah, thank you so much, my friend, for coming. I've been trying to get Jason, the wizard, since Stoa first started. I think we jumped on a Zoom call, like just went out a week after this. So I'm very glad that you found your way here.
Thank you.
So that being said, just a couple of upcoming announcements. For more events, you can go to the website, thestoa.ca, sign up for the mailing list. And if you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do so. A lot of awesome events coming up. So we have a Sensemaker in Residence series. So this is a 4-part series, and we have a lot of names that I've mentioned today. Dave Snowden, he's a Sensemaker for September, and he's coming in every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and all those videos will be on YouTube if you can't make that. And we have Daniel Gertz, which is one part of the Hansi Freinach character that Jason was mentioning, and he's coming in October, Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern time to do Metamodern deep dives, art, spirituality, sexuality, and faith. So that's gonna be really cool. Again, those are 4-part series, a similar format as today. And on Thursday, we got Joe Norman coming in at 8 p.m. Eastern time to talk about applied complexity. So it's a theme this week for sure. So you can RSVP directly there and check out the stoa.ca. So that being said, Jason, Stoa Village, love you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.